So the first lesson that we're going to be going over is placement and rounding. Okay? Do I recommend you taking notes? Of course. This is being recorded, so that's going to be on YouTube, whatever I write up here. So, in case you ever want to review what I teach you, you can always go back to the videos. So today we're going over placement and rounding. Does anybody know what placement even means or what rounding even means? Don't know? It's fine.
Places?
Placement.
Oh, placement.
Yeah. Placement. So if we look at this number here, such as let me switch this up. There you go. So 3,203. By the way, that's how you say that. 3,203. All right. The thing is, this is a number, yes. The thing is, every number has something called place value. Now, you probably already know what it is. For instance, this first number here. This first number. Uh-oh. So that 3, that first 3 that I just underlined. This spot right here, it has a name. Do we know what name it's called? Yeah. The ones place. The ones place. Alright? That's what we're learning first. We got to memorize our place value of a number, of a digit, of a big number, So this one will always be your ones place. Then comes the next number next to it. What's that called?
10.
Yep, we're starting to refresh our mind. We got our tens. Tens. What about the next one next to it?
Hundredths.
Hundreds. Then I'll just continue on. It says thousands. And yeah, let's do the next one. Let's add something else, such as an 8 here, and then a 9, and then a 6. Why not? So if we look at this 8 right there, do we remember what that one's called?
10,000.
Yes. 10,000s. What about this one?
100,000s.
100,000s. And then what about this last one here?
Million.
Millions. These, my friends, are place values, and it's your job to memorize the place value. All right? Because of the next thing that we're going to be learning, which is rounding. But before we move on to rounding, what we got to do is learn and refresh and master our place values, all right? So, let's look at it like this. Let's say we push this aside, and we look at a new number. Let's say I just give you 116. Tell me, what is the digit that represents the hundreds place?
5.
Hundreds, which is 5. Because look at here, this is the hundreds place, which is 1, 2, 3, 3 digits in, which is the 5, right? So that would mean, what's the tens place?
Tens place is 1.
That's the 1.
Yeah.
What about the ones place?
6.
6, right? Good. $33,500. Okay, what's the 10,000s place?
5.
the 10,000s?
3.
So look, this is why we got to memorize it. The 10,000s is here, right? It's the 8 in this first example that we did, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places in. Did we see that? So the 10,000s place is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
3.
3. Tell me, what's the ones place?
0.
0. What's the tens place?
0.
What's the thousands place? And what's the hundreds place? We see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, this is important. In math, I don't like when students think that they have to memorize stuff. I don't like that word, memorizing. Memorizing is helpful with some stuff, but in math, you don't just want to memorize things. You kind of want to really get it down where you actually know what's being done. You just don't want to memorize something, right? But that's in later math. In this beginning math, this is one of the very few times in which I tell my students, memorize your place values. Just burn it into your brain. Memorize this, okay? You want to memorize this because of the next thing that I'm going to teach you.
Okay.
So hopefully you wrote this down. Hopefully you memorized it. Let's look at this. What if we're being told to round something? Do we know what rounding means?
Right.
And then I'll put a 2 here. Okay. Let's look at this example. 5,362. So, rounding. This is the famous question in math. Round 5,362 to the nearest tens place, hundredths place, thousandths place. They'll tell you what you need to round to, right? It was actually in our assessment that we were given. I think it was question, I don't know. It was question number 5. Question number 5 was saying round 443 to the nearest 100, right?
I know.
Number 5. So, actually, let's do that example first. And then we'll go back and do the one that I just wrote up. To the nearest 100. All right. Round 443 to the nearest 100. This is a typical math question, a typical rounding question. Round this answer to the nearest 100. How do we round? Well, rounding just means changing the number to the closest value, okay? So it's the equivalent of saying, let's pretend you're dealing with money, right? And somebody asks you for 80 cents.
Okay.
80 cents, am I right?
Okay.
You don't have 80 cents exactly.
No, you have 100.
You have 50 cents. You have a 50-cent coin. Have you seen those? Just the one 50-cent coin, the big ones. And you have $1. Which one do we give that person? Do we give him the 50 cents or do we give him the $1? You don't have 80 cents, right? You give them the $1 because they need 80 cents. If you give them 50 cents, they now need 30 cents.
But you can give 25, so it can jump to 75.
So the $1 is closer to 80.
Yeah.
That's
If it was
rounding.
75.
If it was 75, I mean, in this example, you'll always give them $1. If it was 60, if it was 70,
It's
it was
more higher.
because they need They need to buy something. 50 cents is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
You need to give them just $1, right? But in math, like this example, round 443 to the nearest 100, it says round to the nearest 100, all right? We got to develop our skill of rounding to the nearest 100, to the nearest tenth, to the nearest whatever, right? In a mathematical way, not a real life scenario. We're going to now learn the mathematical way to round to the nearest whatever. To the nearest ones, to the nearest tens, to the nearest... So this example is the hundreds. How do you round to this example to the nearest hundreds? This is our first example. This is what we do. 443. Whenever they tell you to round to the nearest whatever, in this example, 100, go to that place value. So 443. What is the hundredths place?
4.
Which 4?
The third one.
This one, right?
Yeah.
That's your hundredths place. Watch this. Hundreds. Right? Hundreds. All right. So if they tell us round to the nearest hundreds, go to the hundredths place. Go to it. I'm right here.
Okay.
I'm here. I made it. Right? I drove over there and I made it to the hundredths place. Now, what you're going to do always is look to the neighbor. Look to the right. Always look to the right. Okay? In this case, it's a 4. So, it's a 4. This neighbor of your place value that they're telling you to round, you will always look at it and you're always going to ask yourself 2 things. You're going to ask yourself, does my number fall under my first rule or my second rule? So the first rule is this. If this neighbor to the right falls between 1 and 4, what you're going to do is keep place value the same. That might seem confusing, but I'll explain it. Right now I'm just writing out my rules. I'll explain these rules in a sec.
Okay.
If this neighbor to the right of your place value happens to be between 5 and 9, you are going to add 1 to the place value. Alright, so now I got my rules. Let's actually do this now. Let's actually do this as a class. So, round to the nearest hundreds. So, I go to the 100ths. I look to the neighbor to the right. The neighbor to the right is a 4. That 4, what rule does it fall under? Does it fall under my first rule or my second rule?
Second.
I hear second. Does anybody else think something different? First. What do you think? You're the tiebreaker here.
Well, I go last.
You go with the second?
Yeah,
first.
yeah. I mean second.
So
I
Go
go.
with the
row of
second?
the
All right.
nearest to 100 is
So this 4 fell under this rule,
Yeah.
which meant I must go back to my place value, the hundreds place, keep it the same, 4. And then the rest of the numbers to the right all become zeros, okay? They become zeros.
they all become 0.
Yes. 443 rounded to the nearest 100 is 400. Okay? All because of that number to the right of your place value. The number to the right, the neighbor, the buddy. That 4 in the middle told us our hundredths place must stay the same. Keep place value the same. Stay the same. Keep this one the same and make everything else 0.
So So how about that if there was
A 5 or a 6 or a higher number? Good question. Let's look at this example. Let's look at the example like this. Let's pretend I don't have 443. Let's say the question was now this, 463. So 463. All right. Round 463 to the nearest hundred. Okay. Go to your hundredths place. 4. That's the hundreds, right? Look to the right. It's a 6. 6. What rule does it fall under? The second, 5 to 9, right? Are we seeing this rule? This 6, which one does it fall under? 5 and 9. In between 5 and 9. So, this rule tells us add 1 to the place value. So you go back to your 4, your hundredths place that they told us to go to, and you add 1.
We jump, yeah.
You add it, you make it up to 5.
Okay.
And then just like before, the rest becomes 0. It's always going to be zeros. Right? 463 rounded to the nearest hundred is 500.
I'm still like,
I know. We're going to do some examples. That's why. We're going to do a lot more examples because this takes some practice.
okay.
But follow the steps. So let's go back to this one. Do not, if you can, write down your rule or try to memorize it. It's fine. A number between 1 and 4 means your place value stays the same. A number that falls between 5 and 9 means your place value goes up 1. Those are 2 rules. So now let's look at
1 to 4 goes down?
No, it stays the same.
Stays the same?
Yeah. So now let's look at this. 5,362. If I were to say round 5,362 to the nearest tens place. Tens place. Let's do our process. So, round 5,362 to the nearest tens place. So, tell me, what's the tens place first?
6 is the tens.
This is the tens place. That's why it's important to memorize your place value. Okay, step number 1 done. Step number 2, look to the buddy. Look to its friend. Its friend to the right. Look at its friend. All right, now ask yourself, that friend, it's a 2. Which rule does that 2 fall under?
So we added 1.
Does it
doesn't
fall?
change. It doesn't change, yeah.
It falls under the first rule, 1 to 4, right? Which means that rule tells us keep it the same.
yeah, because you have to pass 5 to add.
Exactly. So this tells us that the 6 must stay the same. 5, 3, 6. And then everything to the right will always become 0. In this case, there was only 1 extra number, so 0.
Yeah.
So 5,362 rounded to the nearest tens place is 5,360.
Just take the 0, yeah, okay.
Okay? Now let's turn it up a notch, okay?
So it doesn't change, yeah.
Yeah,
The
you
six
take
the
0.
6 doesn't change, but this 2 did. It became 360.
Yeah, it is more close to 0.
Exactly. But because of the tens place, right?
Exactly.
If I were to say this, round 5,362 to the nearest hundredths place.
Oh.
You do the same steps, but now at the hundredths place. So tell me, what's the hundredths place? 3. Boom.
Okay.
And same step. Look to its friend to the right. Its friend to the right. It's a 6. What rule does that 6 fall under?
5 to 9.
5 to 9 rule.
Yeah, yeah,
Which
5 to 9.
means this if you go back to the place value that they told us to round, the 3, that 3,
It's going up.
it
yeah.
needs to go up 1. So 5, 4, and then 0, 0. Everything to the right of that place value will always be 0 afterwards.
So,
But 5,362 rounded to the nearest hundredths is 5,400.
because it's past 5.
Because that 6 was past 5.
Yeah.
It was to the right of the hundredths place. That number to the right is the key. Okay? And what the other thing that's a key is the question. The question said round to the nearest hundreds. So that's why you go to the hundreds. The one before, round to the nearest tens. That's why we went to the tens place. If it said round to the nearest ones, if it said round to the nearest thousands, well, let's do that. Same number, except this time, I want you to round to the nearest thousand. So tell me, what's the thousands place?
5.
5. 5. Just like before. You're going to do this all the time. Look to its right.
It's under 4.
It's under 4, right? Which means that place value, the thousands place, the 5,
5,000.
what happens to it?
It will be 5,000 or
Yep. It stays the same. And the rest becomes zeros. Does that make sense now?
Yeah.
5,362 rounded to the nearest thousands is 5,000. Okay. So there's two things that we need to master, and the first one is you need to 100% memorize your place values. You need to do that. The second step, the second thing you need to do is memorize your 2 rules and memorize your steps. Remember, go to whatever it is they're telling us to round to. You go to it, look to the right, ask yourself your 2 rules, and then change this accordingly. Those are 2 things that we must master, that I suggest you mastering in order to make your life easier with this upcoming couple of weeks. Let's do one more. Okay. Okay. So now comes the question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Round 369,547 to the nearest 10,000s place. So what's the 10,000s place? 6. Look to the buddy to the right. It's 9. What rule does that fall under? The first rule or second rule?
Second.
Second, which means that 10,000s place, the 6, goes up 1.
Oh, yes.
2,
7.
7. So let me push that aside. 3,007. And what happens to all the numbers to the right?
0. Oh, now I got it.
370,000. That's 369,547. Rounded to the nearest 10,000s is 370,000.
Oh, I got it. I remember.
What if I were to change it up? What if I were to say round 369,547 to the nearest hundreds? 5. That's the hundreds place. Okay. Look to the right. It's a 4. What rule does that fall under?
No, it's 0. It doesn't change.
It doesn't change. The place value, the hundreds
It is close to
place
0, yeah.
does not change.
Yeah.
So everything to the left always stays the same. That's always. Everything to the left will always stay the same. But the number itself, the place value, the hundreds place, will stay the same. And then again, everything to the right will become 0.
Yeah.
So 369,547 rounded to the nearest hundreds is 369,500. It all matters on the question. If they tell you to
Yeah.
round to that specific place value, you got to go to it and look to the right.
Which number?
Yeah. Now comes your first trick problem
Okay.
in math. Your first one. Round 369,547 to the nearest thousands place. So what's the thousands place?
It's like
5?
Nope.
No, 9.
9. That's the thousands. Okay. Look to the right.
Okay.
5.
5.
What rule does that fall under?
0. You don't have to add.
5 to 9 is
5 to
Oh,
9
yeah,
rule.
5 to 9. Yeah,
You
yeah,
add
5.
one.
You add 1.
But here comes your first trick. You add 1 to the 9.
Yeah.
What's 9 plus 1?
10.
What do we do now? You can't do this.
Oh, add 0 no? Yeah, you cannot.
Oopsie. You can't put a little 10 in the middle.
No. So
No,
you
right? So the thing is, this is your first problem, your first tricky situation.
so the 6 changed to 7.
Because we can't jump this up to 10, that extra 1 jumps to the number to the
7.
left.
So you
So
can
this
handle it.
6 goes up 1,
To 7.
and then the rest becomes 0. All because of that 9. The 9 is the tricky number, I promise you. So it actually
This
becomes that. What was that?
was a little long. This one.
So, let's do one more. Actually, let's do this one. 6, 9, 7. Okay. Round your answer to the nearest hundreds place. What's the hundreds place? So the hundreds, ones, tens, hundreds. The 9 is the hundreds. Look to the right. 7. What rule does that fall under?
9?
It falls under the second rule,
Yeah.
which tells you your place value must go up 1.
Yeah, you have to add 1.
So again, it's the 9 situation. That 9, you have to add 1, but it's already at its peak, right? 9.
To 6.
So you have to go to the number to the left and add 1 to that. That 6
It's like-
becomes a 7.
9, it doesn't count. Like, you cannot do nothing with 9.
Exactly. It's already at its max. You have to jump. So 6,975 rounded to the nearest hundredths is 7,000. What if that 7 was a 4? 6,945. And I told you to round this to the nearest hundreds. Well, you go to your hundreds, look to the right. 4. What rule does that fall under?
Gonna be, you have to add 1. So,
1 to 4.
oh, 1 to 4 is
You
same.
keep the same, which
same,
means
same.
6,900. In this case, because that 4 told us we had to keep the 9 the same, there's no need to jump forward and do anything. It just stays the same. But remember, everything to the right will always become 0. That's always going to be the case. Do we like 9s or what? 9s are fun, aren't they?
They are.
Now comes another tricky one. Now comes a tricky one. All right, so here it comes. You ready?
Go ahead.
Round 6,945 to the nearest 10,000s. Ah, so tell me, where's the 10,000s place?
So gonna be the 4.
Watch this. No. Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s. What's the number? What's the number in the 10,000s place?
Last.
It technically doesn't have one, does
Yeah,
it?
exactly.
But there is a number there. That number is 0.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And let me tell you this. Let me tell you why. Any number, 5, 100, 17, 5 million, doesn't ever matter. Let's just look at 5. Any number, believe it or not, keep note of this, has an infinite. Do we know what the word infinite means?
Yeah, like,
Endless.
yeah.
It has an endless amount of zeros in front of it. Infinite. It has it. It's just invisible to us. We don't deal with it, right? Just imagine having to write zeros all the time. Right? It's no sense. Also keep in mind, and this is something we're going to deal with tomorrow, is any whole number, any regular number like a 5, not only does it have an infinite amount of zeros in front, but it also has an infinite amount of zeros behind it. It has the decimal, which we're dealing with tomorrow, but it has 5.00000. We don't see it, but it's there. Okay?
Yeah, one question.
Mm-hmm.
The 0.
So the zeros are important for a question like this. If they tell you round your answer to the nearest 10,000s, well, what's the 10,000s place? It's a 0.
0.
Because there is an endless amount, right? So now that you add that 0, let's round it. Look to the buddy to the right. It's a 6. What rule does that fall under?
Same. I mean,
Add 1.
Odd.
5 to 9 rule. Which means you add 1 to the place value, right?
okay.
So this is the place value, the 10,000s. What's 0 plus 1?
1.
1. And then the rest becomes 0.
No change. 10,000.
So you're not going to be given a lot of questions like these. But don't be surprised if you see one. If you technically don't see a 10,000s place, or a thousands place, or a hundreds place, you got to add that 0 and do the same process. Because 6,945 rounded to the nearest 10,000s is 10,000.
10,000.
Okay. Beautiful work on place values and rounding. We're going to be doing our worksheet soon, but let me tell you this first. So, place value, rounding, all of that is important, but there's another important part of math, which is sometimes the stuff that we don't really think too much about, but it is comparing numbers. Comparing numbers. Now, majority of you did well on this. Majority of you did well. Arranging this from least to greatest. From least to greatest, how would you arrange this? Well, this arranged from least to greatest is, oopsies, I already have it in the answer. My apologies. Scratch that. This was supposed to be the order. Alright. Arrange this from least to greatest. Alright. This arranged from least to greatest should be 98, 317, 342. Why though? Well, think about money. Would you be happy with $98 or $342? You'd be happy with the bigger number, right? But the thing is, my friends, is to always look at, we're used to it because we deal with money, right?
Yeah.
We deal with money, but in reality, look at the place values. If we were to arrange this vertically, what that means is this. Arrange it up and down. Arrange it up and down with all your ones place aligned. So it looks like this. Oopsies. $342, $98, $317. Do you see all my ones placed aligned?
Yeah.
I aligned it, right? You could add an extra 0 there for the 98 because I told you there's an invisible amount, right? Look, now you could look at it. Look at each place value, starting with the first value. 303. What's the smallest one there?
It's like silent.
It's well, 0 is smaller than 3, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you already know this one right here is the smallest one.
Yeah.
Now move on to your next one, 491. Well, this one's already done,
Yeah.
right? So now 4 and 1. Which one's the smaller one? The 1, right? So we already know the next one is the 317, and then obviously now that the one that's left over is 342. Now, because we deal with money, we already know, we could look at a set of numbers and we could be like, that's smaller, that's smaller, that's smaller. But that's because we have grown up already having that in our head. If you stare at a number and if you forget about money and all that, if you brought a kid in that doesn't deal with money, right? Is just learning numbers, how would they know 317 is smaller than 342? It's because of this right here. It's because of their place values. They know this one is the largest, this is the second, and this is the least. You might be able to rearrange stuff good. Okay, good. But if you're ever stuck, if you just look at two numbers and you're like, I don't know which one's bigger and which one's smaller, for whatever reason, look at the place values and then compare them. And then you should be able to do your thing.